Okay, thank you, Chris, and thanks to all of you for joining in at this hour of the night on a weekday night. I appreciate your being with us. The topic is the Islamo-Marxist threat to America, or as we sometimes call it, the red, black, green axis in action. I want to assure you all that everything I'm going to tell you tonight is unclassified. It's all open source. And that goes for the entire presentation. This is what I call my Love Me page. It's just a little visual about some of the things I've done after grad school, United States Marine Corps Officer Candidate School. That's me over there a long time ago, followed by 20 years undercover Russia division of the CIA, then a number of think tanks and nonprofits. You will see there, of course, the United West, and also our new project called Defend the Border. That's at defendtheborder.org, if you'd like to take a look at that. I work with Sarja Sangari at the Near East Center for Strategic Engagement. And as Chris mentioned, also you'll see on the left side there with John Guandolo and John Bennett at Understanding the Threat. So let's launch into this because I've got quite a bit to cover, and I might skip along a little quickly for some things, but if I do skip over some things, make a note and bring it up in the Q&A, and I'll be glad to go back to it. So the theme, the overall theme here tonight is basically one of freedom versus tyranny. Robert Unanue is the CEO of Goya Foods, and you might remember a couple of years ago, there was a boycott tried to be launched against his company. He was a guest in January of 21, about 2 years ago, on the Fox Business Show with Charles Payne. And what he said, I thought was worth remembering. He said, "We've got an iceberg of communism ahead of us." This is the CEO of an American food company, and he understood this. And then I've got the quote at the bottom, which is often attributed to Thomas Jefferson, although not completely sure this is his quote, but it's attributed to him. "The price of liberty is eternal vigilance." This book you probably have heard of before, and I may have mentioned it on different talks and programs, but The Naked Communist. This book written by former FBI agent W. Cleon Skousen. It was published in 1958. And I want to highlight chapter 13, which is called The 45 Goals of Communism Today, meaning 1958, right, when it was published. And by the way, if you would like a standalone PDF of just that chapter 13 with the 45 Goals of Communism Today, you can do a search online for it. And there are a couple of different versions where you can get the 45 Goals of Communism Today without having to get the book or read the whole book. 1963, those 45 goals were read into the congressional record. What's important about this list is that it seems to be a blueprint of action that has unfortunately been followed all too closely in the decades since this was written. Skousen, I think, took the information here from the congressional committee hearings that were held in the early 1950s. House on Un-American Activities Committee, and then on the Senate side, it was Senator Joseph McCarthy. And they brought before them, under subpoena and oath, former communists who testified to what communism was and what it intended, what its motivation, what its program is, I should say, probably. And these 45 goals are what Skousen took from that testimony. And I won't go through all of the 45, but here on this slide, you see a summary of a few of them. Gain control of both political parties, referring to Democrat and Republican parties. Check, I think. Gain control of the schools. That's number 17. Check. Get control of the media, entertainment. At that time, it was radio, what they called motion pictures, TV. Another one, number 25, is normalize obscenity and pornography. That's sure come a long way. And then others refer to denigrating the founding fathers and the US Constitution. Every one of these 45 goals directed at bringing down the United States, destroying the United States from within by attacking our institutions of society. All right, I would say that America right now is at a critical turning point. You can see around this slide the flags of the People's Republic of China, upper left corner. The right-hand corner, I think, is a good a visual for our program tonight, which is the axis or the alliance among the Marxists, the communists, Black Lives Matter movement, which is, you could say, mostly defunct, but its people are still out there. And then, of course, the hammer and sickle down in the lower right-hand corner. The communist enemies of this country, of this republic, are attempting a coup d'etat in order to delegitimize the Constitution, law and order, our president, the electoral system itself. Enemies of this country see this now, where we are, when we are in this period, where we are living right now. They see us in the final stage of a strategy for global conquest that began with and just after the 1917 revolution, communist revolution in Russia. So with the theme of tonight, red, black, green axis, the communists and the Marxists, the red, ally with Black Lives Matter movement, that's the black, and the Muslim Brotherhood, the Islamic movement overall, that's the green. And you say, well, they're very different ideologies. They don't stand for the same things. Well, they don't necessarily. But the one thing they do ally on and join forces on in an opportunistic way is to reach their common goal, and that's the destruction of America. We're looking right now at a Communist Party of China color revolution. There is a Marxist counter-state revolution, sometimes it's termed that way, a counter-state revolution. It operates on two levels. There's the subversive level, below the scenes, you might say. Rudi Dutschke was a German communist, and he's the one who actually coined the term long march through the institutions, although it's often attributed to the Italian communist Antonio Gramsci. It's really Rudi Dutschke. But in any case, long march through the institutions means the 45 goals of communism today, right? It is subversion, infiltration, co-option from within our own institutions. And that's where the Chinese communists, I think, are a lot more subtle, a lot more sophisticated even than the Russians. And I would say that the Chinese Communist Party today leads the international communist movement. It's not Russia. They're bad enough. They're thugs. Well, we see what they're doing in Ukraine. But the leadership of the international communist movement today, I think, has shifted to China and the Chinese Communist Party. We've obviously been through the subversive phase of this color revolution. And certainly, at least by 2-3 years ago, we were seeing the violent street phase of the violent Communist Party of China, Antifa, BLM street riots. Those are subsided right now, have subsided right now, but I wouldn't say they're gone and finished. All right, this book may be familiar to you, might have called it more of a monograph. In fact, Unrestricted Warfare was the master's thesis of two communist China People's Liberation Army colonels, published at least in English, translation from the Mandarin in 1999. These PLA officers then as now, and certainly the entire leadership of the CCP, to certainly include Xi Jinping himself, they are all steeped in the doctrine, the military doctrine of Sun Tzu and his art of war, his military doctrine, which is to say, to conquer from within in a way that you do not even have to get to kinetic violent warfare. The key to all of this, of course, multiple methods of operation, which are delineated in this book, Unrestricted Warfare. I recommend it to you. It's not terribly long or hard to read, but it is a staple if we're to understand the communist movement today. This is a a quote from one of the pages towards the middle of this book, Unrestricted Warfare, and there's a page there that lists something like 24 or more of what the Chinese communists consider to be their core military doctrine, their military attack vectors. And you can see here, it's not the complete list, but on the slide I've got atomic warfare. This is a quote from the book. Atomic warfare, diplomatic warfare, network warfare, trade warfare, oh yes, biochemical warfare, psychological warfare, economic warfare, space warfare, and so forth, drug warfare, and so forth. There were more of them, but those caught my attention, and in particular, I think, catches all of our attention, biochemical warfare. Okay, what is the role of the Chinese Communist Party infiltrating into American society? In the last, I would have to say, at least a couple of decades, although we may be more aware of it much more recently than that. Well, the Chinese Communist Party was heavily involved in the U.S. street insurgency of 2020. There are linkages between the Chinese Communist Party with the pro-Maoist Freedom Road Socialist Organization, the Liberation Road, M4BL, and Black Lives Matter movement itself. Movement for Black Lives is what that abbreviation is, M4BL, Movement for Black Lives, and then Black Lives Matter movement. All of them literally are historically close to Beijing and their ideological predecessors, or maybe I should say that these are the ideological descendants of the Black Power movements back in the 60s. I had my one and only article ever published at Epoch Times back in October of 2021, I think it was, and it's called, let's see, Communism, let's see, what was it called? Race, Revolution, and the Communist Party. I think that was it. Race, Revolution, and the Communist Party, the name of the article. But it traced how the black militants of the 60s and on into the 70s, Mao Zedong, of course, didn't die until 1976. Cultural Revolution pretty much raged until his death. And what I draw is the connection. Huey P. Newton, Stokely Carmichael, names that might come back to you from the violent street burning of cities in the 1960s. These guys literally went over to Beijing to meet with Mao Zedong, his number two, Zhou Enlai, and to have photo ops with him, which is how we have the record of those meetings to this day. So very much they were connected then, very visibly, very photographically with the Chinese Communist Party. It's not quite that visual. Today we don't have, as far as I know, delegations going over to China, but they don't need to because China and the Communist Party are here. They're in our cities now. Now, one of the most important vehicles for the spread of the Chinese Communist Party infiltration, co-option, propaganda into American society goes through what they call the United Front Work Department. It is subordinate to the Chinese Communist Party's Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party. Might note that back in May of 2019, this is coming up on 4 years ago. Does anybody really know this yet? The Xinhua News Agency published an editorial that is the mouthpiece of the Chinese Communist Party, or at least one of them, in their media. And what they wrote was, quote, a real people's war being declared against the United States of America. I don't know how people missed this or didn't pay attention to it. Chinese Communist Party declared open warfare against the United States 4 years ago, or almost. But it is an unconventional warfare, unrestricted warfare, and so it's not always perceived as it ought to be as the threat that it really is. All right, here is Peter Schweitzer in a photo together with his book of a couple years ago called Red-Handed. And in it, he does a terrific work here. I recommend this book to you highly. He describes the infiltration of United States societal institutions. Like each chapter of this book talks about one of those societal institutions. There's academia, there's government, there's the diplomatic corps, and so forth. And he describes co-option from within by the CCP. And he translates a term from the Mandarin, elite capture. And what the CCP does is they go after the leadership of our institutions, the team leaders of the MBA, let's say, the producers in Hollywood making movies, the publishers, the editorial page directors, let's say, of our media, you know, the owners of social media, Facebook, TikTok for sure, in the United States, and all of those. And they woo them. They bring them over on junkets, all expense paid trips to China, get to see the Great Wall, eat wonderful food, go see some wonderful artistic presentations in theater and dance. It's great. And then they come home and they never write or speak another critical word about China ever again. Or if they do, there's another phrase that Peter Schweitzer translates. It's called big help, little badmouth, right? Big help meaning overall you are speaking well of the Chinese Communist Party or of China. Little badmouth means just for, you know, show purposes. You can criticize every now and then a little bit. So big help, little badmouth. And that's the formula that they accept. All right, so the offensive by the CCP, clearly in view now, certainly with the SARS-CoV-2, the China virus, and the balloons. Well, we know of only one balloon they took responsibility for, and we only know the other three are objects, but I did write this in the plural. All right. One of the main operations for the CCP is information operations, as I've kind of alluded to here. Confucius Institutes are all over the place on U.S. campuses, university campuses, and even on down into high school level campuses. They operate closely, the Confucius Institutes, or the names that they've changed them into so that we don't know that they're Confucius Institutes anymore. They've tried to do that. But in any case, all of them, they operate under the direction of the United Front Work Department. Thousand Talents program is one that co-ops university professors in particular, researchers, scientists at our national laboratories, pays them under the table. They're supposed to be reporting income like that. They don't. Every now and then they get caught, but too often I think, and I'm afraid they do not. And so in these ways, U.S. students are exposed to CC propaganda and recruitment efforts. It's not just Chinese culture and language that is conveyed through the Confucius Institutes, for example. But how about TikTok, which kids love? I think it's the #1 social media app on cell phones in the country today. But what? TikTok is owned by ByteDance. ByteDance is connected to the Chinese Communist Party. And oh, by the way, if you would like all the contents of your device, your cell phone, your laptop, your notebook, whatever it is, scooped up and sent immediately off to Wuhan, China, together with all of your contacts, your text messages, and everything else, just go ahead and click on some TikTok videos. Don't. And if you have kids in the family, please alert them. Or if they're younger, just say, no, you're not going to have TikTok on your phone, period. That's it. As I've said, major U.S. media companies or their parent companies have business interests inside of China. So do sports. So do movies out of Hollywood. They don't want to lose the chance to access what is maybe a 1.4 billion person market in China. And China takes advantage of that greed. And so I've talked about how they co-opt the leadership of all of our social media and other media. Let me talk just really quickly about this fellow here. He's an American citizen. His name is Steve McClure. And back around 2010, he was invited from George Washington, I think it is, right? Is that what I said? George Washington University here in Virginia invited over to work in Wuhan, China at an international geospatial laboratory because his expertise is in surveying and mapping, remote sensing, creating data geospatial mapping. That's what he does. He went to work for Wuda Geoinformatics Company, Ltd. In Wuhan, China. And as far as I know, and I'll tell you, I got this from Trevor Loudon, so I think this is pretty accurate information. To the best of our knowledge, he's still there. Well, back in the last couple of elections, he put his geospatial data mapping skills to work for the Chinese Communist Party. And what that means is they were slicing and dicing the American electorate, right, by geospatial data mining. So, for example, over here, we've got all the soccer moms. Here are the African-American communities. Hispanics live over there. This is what we're talking about in a way that would then allow targeted messaging to these different demographic groups. That's what he's helping them with. American citizen. Okay. The story of Connect. Connect is a management software company that works with election data, not the voting per se, but with the election worker personnel data, which was supposed to be under contract, by contract, kept only in the United States, on servers in the United States, accessible only by American citizens, but Catherine Engelbrecht and Greg Phillips, working at True the Vote, found out that, oh, by the way, all that data was being kept on servers, or at least shared on servers inside of China. The CEO of Connect, Wang Xiang, built the software. Member of the Chinese Students and Scholars Association at the University of New Mexico. Part of the United Front Work Department again. In any case, I'm sorry, the CEO of the company is named Eugene Yu. Apologize on that. Eugene Yu is the CEO. He was briefly arrested a couple of months ago, but charges were dropped and he was let go. Gee, I wonder how that happens. All right. I want to tell you the story of what happened at the Houston consulate of the Chinese Communist Party. And this goes back a few years to the summer of 2020. And at that point in time, the Trump administration was still in office. Secretary of State at that time was Mike Pompeo. Well, what happened is that in that summer of love, remember when they were burning everything down, but it was mostly peaceful, the CCP sent an undercover PLA, People's Liberation Army team, to their Houston consulate. I found this at Radio Free Asia, or I should say a translation of the original Mandarin at Radio Free Asia. That's where I got this story from. The mission of the PLA unit was to use AI, artificial intelligence, and data mining to compile a list of American citizens who they thought would be likely to sympathize with the Antifa and BLM mobs burning American cities to the ground that summer. So once they got that list, then they produced TikTok videos about the street protests, and they sent them out to that list that they had put together of American citizens, advising them, suggesting to them how they too could join in the street riots that were mostly peaceful, burning things down that summer. And that's why I believe, Gordon Chang also believes, that Mike Pompeo closed down that consulate in Houston the summer, July of 2020. But my question is, if the reason that Mike Pompeo gave for closing the consulate was that they were engaged there in espionage and intellectual property theft, well then why, if those were the only reasons, why'd they leave the other 4 consulates open? So China has an embassy in Washington, D.C., a United Nations mission in New York City, and then 4 other consulates that are still open, one in New York, one in Chicago, Los Angeles, and San Francisco, all still open. All right, Here is the Joe Biden administration CIA director, who formerly, before he was appointed as CIA director for the Joe Biden administration, was the president of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, which has its headquarters in downtown Washington, D.C. And during his tenure there, Bill Burns, Carnegie was involved with a group called the China-U.S. Exchange Foundation, part of the United Front Work Department again. They seem to be everywhere, don't they? And the Carnegie Institute, or the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, was a recipient of the China-U.S. Exchange Foundation funding for projects to boost U.S. and China collaboration while Burns was there as president. Carnegie scholars also write for something called China-U.S. Focus, right alongside other authors who are identifiable CCP PLA leadership figures. Can't make this stuff up. All right. Most recently, we got this from the news that Chinese companies are buying up American military academies. That is before college. That is high school prep, junior, which have junior ROTC military programs at them. In 2015, now this actually goes back a little ways, but in 2015, a member of the Chinese Political Consultative Conference, an advisory board for the CCP, bought President Donald Trump's alma mater, the New York Military Academy. And just in 2017, a Chinese education conglomerate with CCP ties bought the Florida Preparatory Academy. Nobody seems to notice these things. All right, let's go to biochemical warfare. SARS-CoV-2, that is the name of the virus, by the way. SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome, CoV, coronavirus-2, because the first one was in 2003, the second 2019. Was developed, genetically manipulated in CCP, PLA, offensive biological weapons labs. There's no question about that. By mid-2019, whether it was at the Wuhan military games or in some other way, SARS-CoV-2, the China virus, was deliberately spread out of Wuhan. How it escaped or got out of the laboratory, maybe it was the Wuhan Institute of Virology, not completely sure, on purpose or by accident, but however it got out, it was then deliberately spread because airline flights closed down within China, within Wuhan city, within Hubei province that it is a part of, but the flights continued out of China all over the rest of the world. And then I would say also that the CCP co-option, here's elite capture again, right, of senior U.S. public health officials, I mean Anthony Fauci, I mean Francis Collins and others, led to the lockdowns. How did we get to lockdowns? Anthony Fauci, the head for decades upon decades of NIAID, the National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, subordinate to the NIH, National Institutes of Health, run by Francis Collins, more about him in a minute, but Fauci had a close colleague and advisor named Cliff Lane. Cliff Lane went to China in 2019, or maybe it was early 2020. I might not have that exactly right. It could be early 2020, and I think maybe January of 2020, and conferred with Chinese leadership there, came back and told Anthony Fauci, boy, the Chinese have got such a grip on this virus thing. They got the whole country locked down. This is going to be over in 2 weeks. We got to lock down. We got to lock down the country. That came straight out of China by way of Cliff Lane to Anthony Fauci, the lead on President Trump's coronavirus task force at the White House. That's how that happened. Deborah Birx was the one who had the responsibility for going around to all the states and passing along that message. Lockdown, 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 governor, governor, mayor, mayor. and that's what happened. And then the vaccine mandates that devastated, together with the lockdowns, our economy, our academic education system, and, oh, by the way, trust in yet one more of American institutions, U.S. public health. Then we talk about fentanyl, and the precursors for fentanyl all come from China to the Mexican drug cartels, who mix them up and then make the fentanyl and press out the pills, the tablets that they traffic across the border. By the way, we all know, I think, right, that the Mexican drug cartels work very closely with Hezbollah. That is undoubtedly on orders of the supreme leader of Iran, the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, because nothing major that Hezbollah does, it does without that permission, without that chain of command. Last year, I'm sure you've seen these statistics, over 107,000 Americans were killed by fentanyl and other opioids, but mostly fentanyl, in fiscal year 2022. All right, what is Marxism's main objective? Well, it's societal chaos, isn't it? Originally, with the Russian Revolution, it was class division, the haves, the have-nots, the bourgeoisie versus the proletariat. But that wasn't going to work in America because we have a free market capitalist system. And people got ahead here. They rose up through hard work and application and talent. So what did they do? The Marxists, the communists, substituted racial division here, taking the place of pure economic class divisions, but the same objective. And that was a methodical global plot to destroy Western civilization and the Westphalian sovereign nation state system and replace it with tyranny the world over. All right. So here is, we're crossing over now into some of the other colors of this axis that we're talking about tonight. Let me take a look at the clock. Okay. So racism has become the leading narrative. And what do we see? Our senior law enforcement officials all over the country, especially in 2020, you can see them in these photos on this slide, if you're able to look at the slides, in uniform, kneeling in the street to the Black Lives Matter mobs. What kind of image does that send? Parroting, you know, the narrative vocabulary, white privilege, racism. They convey an image of America in defeat and subjugation to enemy agitprop. That's what they do. All right, let's cross over to the alliance among others in the red, black, green axis. On this slide, we can see a picture of Saul Alinsky up at the top left. Upper right-hand corner is the logo of the Muslim Brotherhood, the crossed swords cradling a Quran in the middle, color of green for the logo, the hammer and sickle on this slide too. The United States Muslim Brotherhood and the formed a political umbrella group in 2014 called the U.S. Council of Muslim Organizations. By the way, they were invited. Secretary General of the U.S. CMO, thank you, Mike Pompeo, and Vice President Mike Pence invited them into Osama Jamal, into the White House. Black Lives Matter movement, an associated black separatist group, part of this alliance together with the Islamic movement, the Muslim Brotherhood, and also Antifa and other Alinskyite type of anarchists. The targets, U.S. Constitution, our legal system, law and order. So here on this slide, we have Nihad Awad, the Executive Director of CARE, Council on American Islamic Relations, which is the U.S. branch of Hamas, itself the Gaza branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. And at a 2015 conference, Nihad Awad of CARE said, quote, "Black Lives Matter is our matter. Black Lives Matter is our campaign." There's your crossover. There's your linkage between the black of our red, black, green axis and the green Islam. More than that, Black Lives Matter movement has openly expressed support for Hamas. Come to May of 2021, and BLM officially declared solidarity with Hamas terrorists. Some logos around this slide and photos of them marching in the streets. The squad, you know where that term, the squad, comes from, by the way? These representatives in our Congress, House of Representatives. I'm opening right now, I don't know if you can see this, but I've got a copy of Mao's Little Red Book. Great reading. The secretary of a party committee must be good at being a squad leader. A party committee has 10 to 20 members. It is like a squad in the army, and the secretary is like the squad leader. Now, I can't tell you if AOC or Rashida Tlaib actually knows that that's in there, but I'll bet somebody does, and that's where it comes from. So there we've got our own United States congressional members linked up with that stuff too. All right, Black Lives Matter movement burst out in about 2013-14, and it was an organized front project of the Marxist-Leninist Freedom Road Socialist Organization. The hashtag Black Lives Matter became a conduit for anarchist left-wing and anti-Israel, anti-Semitic agenda. Chaos, disorder, riots followed, as we all well know. Here is a slide about the Freedom Road Socialist Organization, the predecessor, the parent, almost if you will, of the Black Lives Matter movement. And it's been around for a long time. It's openly Marxist. It is anti-Israel. It's pro-BDS movement. It's aligned with Palestinian terrorists in Gaza and Judea and Samaria. Their unity statement going back 22 years says, we must be prepared to advance our interests and defend the people by any means necessary. Liberation Road is a splinter off of the Freedom Road Socialist Organization. Same kind of objectives, however, aiming, I think, at the Hispanic population because online, as you can see if you're looking at the slides, Liberation Road, sort of their image, their logo, has underneath it in Spanish, El Camino para la Liberación, which is Liberation Road in Spanish. So I think they were aiming for a more specific demographic with this organization. Never mind, from Liberation Road was spawned the Black Lives Matter movement and the movement for Black Lives. I mean, they are basically one and the same. Let me move along here. Co-founders, Alicia Garza was one of those, came out of other communist Marxist organizations before she helped to co-found Black Lives Matter movement. Opal Tometi, another one. She's the one you saw in the video, you know, saying we are trained Marxists. Opal Tometi, another BLM founder. And here in this slide, if you can see, she is together with Nicolas Maduro, the communist dictator of Venezuela. And this took place in 2015, the photo, at a leadership summit in New York, where she was a speaker, and I guess he was too. Third co-founder of BLM is Patrisse Cullors. Oh, I'm sorry, you know what? She's the one who was on the video saying we are trained Marxists. And you probably have all seen that one. Happily, Black Lives Matter movement has pretty much collapsed because those three founders went off and used tons and tons of donations, millions of dollars, to buy themselves luxury multi-million-dollar homes. But in any case, here is their manifesto, and I won't go through the whole thing because it's kind of lengthy. But in brief, it's anti-aggressive policing in crime-ridden areas. And it is about race and racial quotas for police departments and other measures like that. The hashtag defund the police came straight out of Black Lives Matter, the Black Lives Matter movement. And that came out in mid-2020 online. Here is a statement from the Black Lives Matter movement website, which now is taken down from that website, but the internet is forever, and so you can find this still at the Wayback Machine. And what they said here is, we are committed to disrupting the Western prescribed nuclear family structure. Extended families, villages that collectively care for our children. No, it's not our children. Children belong to their families, to their parents, not according to communism. There's a branch online for getting at the schools, academia. They've got a national online movement that has the endorsement of the National Education Association. It's called Black Lives Matter at School. They're mobilizing their base to be militant on the streets. Okay, Black Power and Mao, I referred to this a little bit before, but again, we've got the crossover between the communist red Marxists and the black part of the red, black, green axis. And what I was telling you before about the 1960s and even earlier, as you can see in the slide, connections between the black militants, Black Panther leaders, and the Chinese Communist Party literally visiting Beijing. Also close ties with the Castro brothers, the Castro regime in Cuba, and Che Guevara and others. How did those three founders of the Black Lives Matter movement get all their funding? Well, they got millions and millions of dollars by a lot of American corporations, big corporations, the Ford Foundation, philanthropic foundations and organizations. George Soros, of course, and this is a little bit dated perhaps, but at least $33 million in grants from George Soros's Open Society Foundation to the Black Lives Matter movement. And you see the names here of some other foundations. And then on this list, you see other well-known American companies: Ben & Jerry's Ice Cream, Ford Foundation, Heinz, Secretary Kerry, Plowshares Fund, Rockefeller Foundation, Tides Foundation. Loads and loads of money flowed to Black Lives Matter movement. Okay, let's talk about Antifa very quickly. Where does that name come from? That's actually an abbreviation. It's an acronym in a way. Antifa actually is short for anti-fascist or anti-fascist action in full, but in the original German is when it was founded and where it was founded. Antifaschistische Aktion is what it is in German. The roots are in Soviet communism. The 20s and 30s, after the Russian Revolution, they thought that Germany would be the next likely place for a communist revolution. And so they took aim at it. Italy and Spain too. But it didn't take. Why? Because the rise of fascism, of the Nazis, of Hitler in those years. And so when you hear about the black shirts, communists, fighting against the brown shirts, the Nazis, they were literally fighting on the streets of Germany and other places in these years, the decades of the 20s and 30s. But the communists lost. The Nazis won. They kicked out the fascists. And so what happened? The Frankfurt School, founded in Frankfurt, Germany, right? And the Soviet Comintern, Soviet Communist International, exported communism to the United States shortly thereafter. And where did the Frankfurt School fetch up? At Columbia University in New York. That is where it got its foothold. And from that leftist, those leftist faculty lounges, it spread throughout university academia in America, and then on down to the lower levels of education, all the way down now, high school and even the elementary grades. So Antifa is the direct descendants of communist street fighters. There are cells now of Antifa all over the world. Yes, thank you, David, for that note. There are cells all over the world, in particular in Europe, Western Europe, certainly the United States. The thing about Antifa is that it's not hierarchically formed. That is, president, vice president, treasurer, secretary, like that in an org chart, but rather horizontally organized with cells that are linked to each other, but do not report upwards to a hierarchy of control. So that, in a way, makes Antifa especially difficult to track and to monitor for law enforcement or anybody else, citizen journalists like an Andy Ngo, for example. So Antifa emerges around 2016 in the United States. The FBI and Department of Homeland Security were aware of them, and they began to put out warnings. We, with John Guandolo at Understanding the Threat, also began to incorporate this information into our training programs in the presidential election year of 2016, when you'll recall there was a lot of violence along the campaign trail, especially targeting President Trump's, then candidate Trump's election campaign. Let me go through the next several slides very quickly. I'm just going to name for you a number of the elements within the overall Antifa umbrella group, if you will. Anti-racist action is one. I've got a slide here showing a photo of Antifa marching, and they've got this great big black banner against white supremacy. Yeah, well, that's one of the ways they want to portray themselves. But here's another sign held by an Antifa demonstrator decked out in black. Again, remember, head to toe black. Why? Because black shirts from the communist revolution and inside of Germany too, and Italy and Spain. She, in this photo, Antifa street thug, is holding a sign, "All my heroes kill cops." Isn't that nice? Wonder who her parents are. Another photo is a group photo, great big, nice, great big group photo, all decked out in black, holding clubs, wooden clubs, showing their flag. And by the way, that flag, the red, black, white flag of Antifa, is the exact same flag that they flew back at the very beginning in Germany when they were still Antifascistische Aktion. But here's a nice little group photo of them. Oh, by the way, some Antifa cadres actually trained inside of Syria. They trained with Kurdish units, PKK Kurdish units there to get battlefield experience, I guess. And we're showing a photo on this slide of them showing their flag over there with the Kurdish units. But here too, in the United States, here's crossover again of the red and the green. Antifa and Hamas, well, doing business as CARE in the United States. Back in 2020, James O'Keefe, that's bad news, right? Veritas, the Veritas Project got a video inside of an Antifa meeting site. It happened to be a library in Portland, Oregon, a meeting site of the Oregon Rose City Antifa. And this undercover infiltrator with a camera got in there and was actually attending their training meeting. But the camera, maybe it was on a button of a shirt or something, I don't know, but it shows in the undercover video this person, we don't know if it's a guy or a gal either, really, but walking down the hallway en route to the room where the training program was going to be held. And the undercover video shows images of posters hanging on the wall of this hallway as they're walking through. And if you can see this slide, the one poster that was hanging on the wall of this Antifa meeting site was directly off of a CARE website. And it's the one you may have seen before. It's in black and white and orange, and it shows a row of houses with a black clad figure with the letters FBI on his back, kind of stalking along the houses, I guess, is the imagery. And the words say, "Build a wall of resistance, don't talk to the FBI." So there you've got Antifa and Hamas CARE directly linked inside of their own meeting space. By Any Means Necessary is another one of the Antifa umbrella groups that very often demonstrate on the streets with them. Crime Think is another one. Campus Anti-Fascist Network, another one operating on United States university campuses. Yes, thank you for that note. I'm looking at the chats that are popping up on my screen. They have a Campus Anti-Fascist Network. Understand, whenever you hear accusations of fascist, you know that you are listening to communists. That goes back to the 20s and 30s. That's where it comes from. But when the accusations fly, "Oh, that's fascist, they are
if they are not themselves truly communist or Marxist, they are perhaps unwittingly mimicking the narrative of the Communist Party. Red Guards Austin is a very big, active group in Austin, Texas, very active down there in Texas. Everywhere, a battlefield, that's another one of them. The Revolutionary Communist Party, very closely associated with the Black Lives Matter movement. And that you can see on some of the banners and the posters that they'll carry, placards in marches. They're all pre-printed very nicely and mounted on these wooden poles. And if you look closely, and maybe it's too small to see on this photo on this slide, but at the very bottom of the placards is printed, who printed them. It's a Black Lives Matter movement demonstration, but the placards are printed by, wait for it, RevCom USA. So there's another connection there. The Workers' World Party, another one together with the Black Lives Matter people. World Workers' Party is aligned very closely with Antifa. We see that again in their own banners and posters that they carry in the demonstration. Revolutionary Abolitionist Movement's another one. I'm skipping through these, I know, quickly, but time is a factor here. Refuse fascism. There you go. That wording again, that narrative, the language. Refuse fascism. It's communist. It's Antifa. It's going down. Very openly at their own website, they write or had written, "We are anarchists." All right. What is coming? What we're looking at, and I want to sum up now with these last few slides before I'll open it up for all of you for Q&A. What is coming that I see, and what I hope you take away from this presentation, is a convergence of America's enemies that are unifying not because they share all the exact same ideology, they don't, but because they share the same objective of tearing down this republic. And so whom do you have? Anarchists, communists, and leftists. That's the red. Black Lives Matter movement, maybe not quite so active anymore, but that's the black. And the global jihad movement in the United States, represented mostly by the Muslim Brotherhood, its front groups, and under the umbrella group of the Brotherhood, the USCMO. They share a willingness to embrace U.S. enemies in this country and abroad, to use violence, to disrupt political events like campaign events, to assault police, I mean deadly force assault against police. The targets, law and order, as they would say, the system, that would be our system of constitutional republic, those are their targets for disruption. Anarchy is their objective. Out of the chaos of the street anarchy that they certainly fomented in 2020, and I expect to see it again in the coming presidential election year coming up, certainly next year if it doesn't begin this year. But out of the chaos of that street anarchy, the communists, the leftists, the Marxists, the Maoists, Muslim Brotherhood, and all of their allies, they see their chance to seize power, because that's how it happened in Russia. Street chaos, and in other places too that saw communist revolution. Street anarchy, breakdown of law and order. Yes, Mike, thank you. And then out of that chaos, they think they can seize power. And so the revolution, as I said down here at the bottom of this slide, it continues. And I think we're going to see a resurgence of it this summer, but certainly next year, the presidential election year again. So what should we do faced with all this? I know, okay, we can get to that, Jay, in the Q&A. Remember, remind me to bring that up if you would. What can we do? We, citizen patriots at the local level. Well, number one, first of all, we need to know who we are. We are children of the Enlightenment. We are defenders of Western civilization, the crucible of reason, of freedom, of order. We are proud of our Western identity, and we treasure things, principles that are in our Judeo-Christian based constitution and other foundational documents. Those principles include individual liberty, equality under man-made law, government by consent of the governed, protection of minorities, First Amendment liberties of belief, free press, free speech, peaceful assembly, redress of grievances. And then we must teach this to our children, grandchildren, other young people in the family, not critical race theory. We call ourselves conservatives because we want to conserve what is valuable in our society against the chaos and the tyranny. Yes, there's going to be homework attached to this. I mentioned at least a couple of books to you tonight, or monographs anyway. Yes, go get them and read them. Learn what the enemy threat doctrine is of each of these. That means to study Islamic doctrine. It means reading Saul Alinsky, Rules for Radicals at least. Read Marx, the Communist Manifesto, together with Friedrich Engels of 1848. It's not that long. It's a slim paperback. The writings of Lenin, the writings of Gramsci, Antonio Gramsci, we mentioned him before, Mao. This little red book really is little. You know why it was that small? Because it was meant to be kept in the pocket of those Mao uniform things they used to wear. It's not that long. Understand what the anarchist objectives are. And then be really careful about disinformation, because it flies all over the place. And it's sometimes hard to weed it out from genuine, good, true information, but the best way is to cross-check. Cross-check, cross-verify things if you have any doubt about it at all. Don't just accept one headline or two. And then conduct, your own study and analysis. Credible sources that I would recommend to you from the media include Breitbart, Epoch Times, mostly the Gateway Pundit, although they've skidded off the tracks a bit here and there lately. Newsmax, One America News, and pretty much the wire services. I mean, AP, Reuters, sort of. Agence France-Presse is another one, Wall Street Journal, but cross-reference, cross-check things. Of anything that I'm recommending to you, cross-check. Okay, enforce our laws. And here is the section of the U.S. Criminal Law Code, 18 U.S.C. Section 2385 here. This is the law about sedition. This is the definition of sedition. Whoever knowingly, willingly advocates, abets, advises, teaches, duty, necessity, desirability, destroying or overthrowing the government of the United States. That's the definition of sedition. It's never enforced, is it? But it needs to be. And then finally, within our own society, be proud of American achievements, our culture, our heroes, relearn our history if that's what we need to do, and the history of Western civilization, and teach it to our children. Honor the heroes who keep us free, the founding fathers, Medal of Honor recipients, Navy SEALs, Delta, Special Forces, Rangers, military, law enforcement, and others. I did not have all the space to include on this slide, but you know what I'm talking about. So let me conclude there. Open it up to Q&A. I hope I haven't gone too long. I know it's after 9 o'clock, but thank you for sticking with me.
Everybody can turn on their camera, unmute yourselves, and we'll have a conversation. Floor is open.
Go ahead, anybody who'd like to start.
Hey, Claire, I'll kick it off.
Sure.
Where do the elites that have kind of sold out to China, but what's their angle in all of this? I don't think Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer really want a communist revolution.
You sure about that?
Well, I don't know.
It's a perfectly good question. Absolutely. What it goes back to, I would say, is that we're now looking at several, 3, 4, 5 generations of Americans who've passed through the academic system that's been infiltrated by communism, and they've graduated and gone on to various leadership positions in our institutions, including government. If you listen to Trevor Loudon, for example, the students who graduated from, all of these different schools that were penetrated by communist academics have gone on to leadership. And that includes, as Trevor Loudon, that's what I was going to say, Trevor Loudon has exposed. He's got two books already out exposing those in the House of Representatives. He's working now on books for the Senate side of Congress, exposing those who are out and out communists. They're actual communists, and many of them are members of the Democratic Socialists of America organization, which is communism, the communist organization in America.
And first of all, Claire, congratulations for a brilliant presentation.
Thank you very
I
much.
agree with everything you say.
Thank
I've
you.
been following, you know, the Marxist penetration and the Islamic indoctrination for a long, long time.
Well, Claire, let me ask you, have we been here before? We've faced subversion. I know one of your themes is, at least with respect to the Islamic threat, is that it's not kinetic at the moment. There's not a whole lot of violence inside the United States at the moment. They are sticking with subversion because they see it working. They don't really need the violence at this moment. But has the United States faced subversion before? And what did we do about it? And can we do it again?
Yeah, we absolutely have faced subversion. I would say the communist subversion beginning the last century, first of all, from the starting point of the Russian Revolution. And here's what was done at the time. I mentioned former FBI agent W. Cleon Skousen. I mentioned the Congressional Committee hearings in the early 1950s. At that point in time, in the depths of the Cold War, and on up, I would say, until about the 1960s, we took the communist threat of subversion very seriously inside of this country. And for a long time, we were willing to go to other places to stop communist expansion elsewhere. I myself served in our U.S. Embassy in San Salvador, El Salvador, in the late 1980s with my then husband and little daughter, who's only 3 years old, there to help defend the democratically elected government of Napoleon Duarte against the FMLN. That's the communist insurgency, the Frente Farabundo Martí para la Liberación Nacional is what it was called. And they were supported by the then Soviet Union and Cuba. We did these things. We fought in South Vietnam to save it from North Vietnam, but unsuccessfully. We went to Korea to fight to save at least part of Korea from communist domination. The result was a split in the country, North and South. So we did these things back then, but not anymore. And now, as I said, I think the baton's been passed to the Chinese Communist Party in terms of global leadership, but the Chinese are doing things differently, more subtly, in a more sophisticated way. The infiltration of our institutions is what I was saying, than the Russians did in terms of launching violent kinetic revolutions in countries like El Salvador, Vietnam, and Korea. The other subversion that we faced for a very long time, of course, is the subversion of Islam in this country that has been primarily led by the Muslim Brotherhood and its multitude of front groups, which are now gathered together in the umbrellas. I told you about the USCMO, United States Conference of Muslim Organizations. And here we've really fallen down on the job. Never ever in all the history since the Brotherhood has arrived here, the first Muslim Brotherhood organization formally in America was the Muslim Student Association, formed in 1963 on the campus of the University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana campus. We have never ever taken that seriously to this day, and it's not for want of trying. Many of us have worked to try to brief. I personally have briefed people in the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Justice, the FBI, the National Security Council, and not a single one of them took me seriously. Every last one of them blew me off. I also had the chance last August to brief our then new Lieutenant Governor of my home state here of Virginia, Winsome Sears, who listened very politely to the briefing I gave about the Muslim Brotherhood, the Adams Center located in Northern Virginia, listened very politely, and then totally blew me off. This has been the history of Muslim subversion, Islamic subversion in the United States. And I'll tell you the success that these front groups and others have had has been incredible. We have seen the infiltration, the co-option of group after group after group. I can name them. The Clarion Project, suborned. The Center for Security Policy, suborned. Gatestone Institute, suborned. Investigative Project on Terrorism, suborned. Middle East Forum, suborned. Every one of them taken down from within by a subversive movement of the Islamic movement writ large. Every one of those and more that I've probably not mentioned. They have been incredibly successful. And I would have to say that the Marxists, the communists on the side of the Chinese Communist Party also have been incredibly successful in recent years. I don't know what it was after the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, the breakup of the USSR, and I was on the inside at that point. I was still serving with the agency at that point. We kind of lost our CI consciousness, if you will, counterintelligence consciousness or national security consciousness. We kind of figured, okay, we won, they lost. Let's go have some pizza and blue dresses, right? This is the 1990s. And all awareness that there could be other or continuing threats from the KGB, which the Soviet Union fell, but the KGB never did. We still call it KGB, even though it's been split up into the old first chief directorate is now the SVR, and the old second directorate is now the FSB, Foreign and Domestic Services, respectively. That split up. The Soviet Union split up geographically, but the KGB never did. It has marched on to this day. But we lost the awareness, and I think that loss of awareness and loss of understanding led as well to discounting the Islamic threat all through the 1990s, and the result was 9/11. Even after Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda issued 2 declarations of war, our leadership inside of the intelligence community insisted, and some to this day, upon calling those fatwas. Well, they weren't fatwas. A fatwa is a religious explanation or a response to a question about Islamic doctrine provided by an authoritative cleric within Islam, Sunni or Shiite. Well, that's not what those were. 1996 and 1998, those were declarations of war. And our senior leadership completely missed the boat. And then came 9/11. So we've lost that national security awareness for any kind of subversive threat, I would say, today. It's just not there.
Is it really that important to focus on the Muslim movements when they are just simply being used?
Yes, absolutely, because they think that they're using the others. Each thinks they're using the others. And the Islamic movement has been going on for 1,400 years. It's very serious. It has swallowed up most of the Middle East that used to be Christian and Jewish, and now is taking aim at the rest of the Western world. Why do they call it the West? Because we are the remnant of what used to be the entire Middle East, the Roman Empire, and Christianity after that. The West is simply the Western rump that is left of what Islam conquered over the centuries. So yes, it's absolutely serious. It is all over the United States. We've got madrasas in America, madrasas teaching little kids from knee high the doctrine of Islam, jihad, Sharia. Yes, it's very serious. And the interfaith dialogue movement is their vehicle for co-opting other faith movements, groups like the Jewish congregations and also Christianity. Very serious.
Yes, there is infiltration of Islamist organizations in the United States.
You mean, right? Islamic.
Yes. However, if you compare the penetration of Islam, United States, and what is happening in Europe, Europe is much more infiltrated through immigration and the
Yeah, so I would say
message-
they're 5, 7, 10 years ahead of us, but we're headed in exactly the same direction.
Right. And what's not helping is the demographics in Europe, especially in France, where I lived for 12 years and I've seen the beginnings of this. The Islamists are growing at exponential rate in France and in UK.
Because they have
and-
a lot more children and we don't. It's simple as that.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, so yeah, I think you're right. 8 to 10 years ahead of us.
Unfortunately. Plus,
Okay.
we now have pouring across our southern border hordes of illegal aliens. We have no idea who they are. They've not been vetted, no background checks, as well as the plane loads that our own Department of Defense flew over evacuees out of Kabul 2 summers ago. If the Taliban and Islamic State did not seed those flows, both the plane loads out of Kabul and the southern border hordes pouring over with jihadis, I'd be very surprised. I think the advance teams for the next 9/11, they're already in cells. They're already meeting up, and they're organizing on U.S. territory. They're already here.
All right, everybody, we've reached the end of our time. Let me say a couple of things quickly. Yes, let me suggest to you that if you follow the news on the subject, you will start to see the dimensions and the seriousness of it. And you can follow the news on my personal website through the Sharia tip sheet, and Claire is providing a lot of that material. And with that, we're going to close tonight. I want to thank everybody for being here. Claire, you've been very generous with your time. Thank you. And thanks, everybody.